I think it's primarily what I found a lack of trust, and it's created initially by poor communication. We were before the call we were speaking about your ideal audience that you have, and it's that thing of not letting go, of not trusting your team's abilities, and the team then doesn't trust you because you want to be in charge and do everything yourself, and you don't want to develop and empower them. So trust, initially when you develop trust, it's a lot easier than trying to re-establish trust after you've lost it. And I think that's the thing. So it's people need to, if they want to get their teams engaged, they need to be able to develop that trust and cultivate that trust. These days it's a lot more difficult. In my time, me being a boomer, it was sort of an accepted norm. If you were told to do something, you did it because the boss said you had to do it. And if you're looking at the millennials, and especially the Gen Zs and the rest of it that are now in the workplace, to them it's not about job it's not about job loyalty, it's not about getting the golden handshake after 45 years. To them it's about job satisfaction. So if they're not enjoying it, then they don't stick around for long. I mean, there's a saying, I can't remember who said it originally, but we all throw it around quite loosely, and that is, you don't resign your job, you resign your boss. And I think that's the big thing. So leaders are caught up in the numbers and the bottom line and the rest of it and making a success, where I think they just need to get more involved with their team and develop the trust, and it starts through communication.
The language that the boss uses oftentimes becomes very different to the language of the employee, and they have different roles, they have different responsibilities. And I find with some leaders, they lack the patience to communicate the direction of the business and how the team members fit into the business and the overall strategic objectives. So they say, well, I've got this job, but where am I in this whole picture? And they go, well, there you are on the org chart. That's where you are. But they still don't have that understanding. So there seems to be this element of confusion. How do I contribute to this business? And I believe that most people want to have an impact. They want to have a contribution, but they don't really know what they're doing. The job description really doesn't say, this is what you got to do. And there's that little bit of confusion between what they think they should be doing, maybe a lack of role awareness. How does the leader adapt their communication to build up the trust? As you said here, to get it back is hard. What can they do to build it up?
The thing is, we talk about communication. I think it's a lot of times it's about understanding the actual terminology or how you apply it. As you're saying, leaders expect people to do things. They forget that it took them a long time, and it was a long journey, making a lot of mistakes along the way to get where they are. And then we want the other people in our team to be a quick fix. We don't want to give them the time to learn. We don't want to invest in their journey and allowing them to make mistakes. But I think the communication, where I found is a big lack, is that communication is usually one way. When I speak to people about communications, yes, I communicate with my team and I tell my team, but it's a two-way street. Now, there's a lot of these cliches around, but do we actually apply them? That's the big thing. So I speak about heartfelt communication. So when I have this concept called the commodities of trust. There are 6 of them, and how to build commodities of trust, because a commodity is something valuable, and trust is probably the most valuable commodity that you can have, the trust of your team and vice versa. So I have a short ebook on it as well. If they're interested, I can send you the link and they can download it for free. But so it starts with communication. So communication, I like concepts. So I have a communication recipe. So I say it's 1 part speaking, 2 parts listening and 3 parts understanding. And I think that's the trick for leaders. And we talk about feedback loops. So we're good at giving advice and giving instructions and speaking to our team. But how often do you sit and let your team communicate with you and tell you, all these fancy terms like a truth teller, for instance. So somebody in your team that has the guts to tell you exactly and honestly what you are doing and where you're going wrong without fear of reprisal or being fired or disciplined or whatever. So I think that's the thing with communication. It needs to be, and why I call it heartfelt communication, it's not sending emails and texts and that type of thing. It's getting off your butt and going to the person and facing them and having a conversation. I mean, you as a podcast host would realize that you can gauge the communication, the level, the authenticity of the communication a lot better by actually seeing somebody. So if I'm sending emails or texts or WhatsApps or whatever social media method there is, there's no personal connection. And then you don't develop trust, because how do I build a relationship with you if I don't get the trust? And the trust comes from the relationship, which comes from the communication.
So 1 part speaking, 2 parts listening, and the 3rd part is the feedback loop.
Yeah, 3
Is that
parts
correct?
understanding, and that you only learn.
3.
Yeah, so 3 parts understanding. In other words, if you look at the way people communicate, everybody says, yes, I communicate, but I don't communicate. You're not listening to me. I am listening to you, but actually I'm only listening to form a response. So I'm listening to parts of what you're saying because I want to answer you. I'm not listening to understand exactly what you're saying to me. So that's why the biggest part of the recipe is the understanding. And the understanding happens through the feedback loops. So if I'm allowing you and I'm listening to what you're saying and I'm taking in and I'm not trying to formulate a response to answer you, then I tend to understand you better, and it helps building trust, because the person feels heard. They feel that they are contributing, and then the trust develops from there.
There's a lot of people who talk about speaking, and then we have people talking about communication. How do you distinguish the difference between speaking and communicating? What's the difference between the two?
Okay, I'll give you a practical example. I am a professional speaker. I'm a member of several professional speaking associations, which all are linked to the Global Speakers Federation. I am also a facilitator and a trainer, so I train leaders, and I do all kinds of other corporate training in that. And I think the difference has been between the two. So if you are speaking, I'm standing up on the stage, I'm talking. There's no response from your side. I'm giving a speech and I'm communicating whatever I want to communicate. I have no idea how well you received what I said. Did you understand what I said? Yes, I can gauge it afterwards with maybe people coming up to you or rebooking you. There's a saying that says the only way you know if you've done a good speech is if somebody comes and books you after it. But when it comes to facilitating, and it's not teaching, because the new thing is we facilitate learning and training. It's I say something and then we get into a conversation with one another, and you telling me, and I'm in the process I can see, do you understand what message I'm trying to convey? So I think that's the big thing. So communicating is a lot more than the facilitating. It's talking, it's getting a message across, but it's also hearing, how do you understand the message? What difficulty do you have with the message? Could I be clearer on my message? We come from different parts of the world. Traditionally, the accepted language is English. But I mean, I live in a part of Africa where people speak English because it's the accepted language of the country. But half the time they don't really understand the English. They use fancy English. Yeah, my surname, my father was Afrikaans, so I have the Afrikaans side as well. And then sometimes it gets lost in translation. So for me, the communication it's that understanding is the important thing. I can say whatever I want, and if I don't check and have that two-way street going, then I don't know whether you actually understood what it was that I said. I
I
think
was
that answers the
reading,
question.
yeah, I was reading recently that there's more than 170,000 words in the English language, and there's about 5,000 that are used on a regular basis. And if you can use 5,000 words, you can get along in any English speaking country quite easily. But it's the definition. You know, it's I could say I love you and you could interpret it totally differently. I could say I love you to my wife and it means something different. One of my clients said to me after our session before, he said, I love you. And this complex equivalence, the meaning of the communication changes from person to person. And I think in that ability to communicate, we've got to have some type of common ground on what these words mean in a particular context. Because saying I love you to my wife's very different to saying I love you to my best mate. But we know the context. That's something that's different.
And the reason you know the context is because the relationship that you've developed. So you have a trust relationship that is developed, and because of that, your mate understands when you say I love you is different to when you say I love you to your wife. Or if a client says I love you, what he's actually saying, is I love what you do and I love what you bring to the table. But we live in a world with so many different cultures and ethnical backgrounds and all kinds of other things that you've got to be careful what you say. I mean, you would know, for me coming from South Africa, now in Namibia, South Africa, especially with past apartheid and things where you've got to be so careful. You might use a word that you think is totally innocent and you might horribly offend somebody else. So so communication is not just speaking, it's thinking about what you're saying. I mean, being in training, writing books, writing training manuals and things like that, I've constantly got to go look at the word and think, should I use inexplicably or should I use not easy to explain? And I've got to think of the audience that I'm communicating to and make sure that, do they understand what it is that I'm trying to say? I can use, of those 5,000 words, there's a lot of them that are very fancy. But does my audience understand what I'm trying to say? So that's the big thing for me always, is to try and keep it as simple as possible. I recently went on an outreach, a friend of mine, to India, and we had to, each of us had a chance to deliver a sermon at one of the churches and things. But you've got to work through a translator. Now, firstly, this guy struggles with English, so he's translating into his language. I have no idea what he's telling them, firstly. And secondly, I've got to, then I say something and then he looks at me and I think, okay, he didn't understand that word. So you're constantly trying to think of easier words so he understands, because he's now got to translate it and convey it to the next person. So it is a challenge, and that's why I say, speaking is easy because I speak my mind, I say what I think, but am I having the impact? So am I offending somebody? And it's not always, again, talking about offending somebody. I can offend somebody because they believe something different to me. Sometimes, that's tough. It happens. But on the other hand, the offending part, if you're working with teams and you're a leader and you're trying to develop teams, it's not so much the offending part, it's the misunderstanding. That I hear what you're saying, but I'm hearing one thing and you're actually saying a different thing, and then we are missing each other.
With this disengagement inside a business, what are some of the visual clues for a leader? If they were to look out across their workforce and visually pick disengagement, what would they be able to see?
There's many of them. The ones that I come across mostly with the people that I work with is they're not buying into, they don't have the passion that I have. They're not buying into my vision. If you do have a vision, I mean, that's another thing, is it's also communication. There's no clear vision. You were saying earlier that the people don't know what they're supposed to do. They don't know what direction the business is going. That's because there's no clear vision that's been communicated, or you've plagiarized somebody else's vision. But the thing is, it's that lack of disengagement is, there's no I'll say motivation. I don't like using the word motivation. I prefer people being inspired than motivated. It's as if they rebel, and you get the sense that they are purposely doing the opposite of what they're supposed to do. It's if they're trying to send you a message, I don't like you, so I'm going to be difficult and I'm going to be obstinate and go in the different direction. Lack of results. I mean, people just don't. A lot of times there's a lack of loyalty, there's a lack of enthusiasm. I need this job because I need to pay my bills at the end of the month, so I'll be here, but I don't really want to be here. And that's sort of the vibe that you pick up with the people in that. And I mean, just to get back to the motivation and the inspired thing, is I say don't motivate people, inspire them. And that's what leaders should do. Because motivation is, I get you to do something because you're expecting something in return. Bonus, salary, day off, whatever. But if I inspire you, you are going to do what's required without expecting anything in return. You're going to do it just because you want to do it and you like the leader, or you have a relationship with the leader. So it's the trick of getting to that. And unfortunately, we are human and we deal with a bunch of emotions. So today I might have a team that is all enthusiastic and fired up, and then tomorrow half of them, I don't know, didn't have the rent to pay their houses, or their child is sick in hospital, and suddenly they are emotionally in a different place. I then have to pick that up as the leader to be able to know that I'm not going to deal with this person differently. I can't handle them the same way I did yesterday. I've got to change the way that I handle them. Otherwise, I'm going to get a negative or a different result in that. So that's it. It's that awareness, being aware, and as I said, that if you build the trust, if you build the relationships, people will more freely be more open to come to you and say, listen, I'm struggling, I'm having a problem. Otherwise, they're going to hide it from you. You're not going to know, and you're just going to see things aren't working the way they are. You're going to be banging your head against the wall and lying awake at 3 o'clock in the morning to try and figure out what's happening. So
I was having a conversation with an executive recently, and he said at his previous company he was doing a really good job, and so he got promoted to leadership. And he said, I was promoted to leadership. Nobody told me the role, responsibilities. Nobody told me what was required. And I didn't get any new education. They just said, well, you're good at your job. Just show other people how to do it. And he said he was set up to fail. And he went into the role because he wanted the money, yes. And he didn't really want to say no. And then he failed. So he left that company, brushed off the dust, and went to a new company. And he went to the next company. He was doing a good job as a technician, and they said, hey, you're good at this. The other leaders left. You're promoted to leadership. And the exact same thing happened. He was promoted to leadership, got a new title. There was no re-onboarding. There was no list of role responsibilities or any education on how to lead people. And he said, Daniel, he said, it's happened once, it's happened twice. And now I'm thinking about leaving because I just don't know what to do as a leader. Yes, I can get the technical result, but leading people, I have got no idea. When business leaders, professionals, get a promotion to leadership, or somebody decides, hey, I'm great at what I do, I want to start a business and lead a team, what are these new skills that they have to develop in order to be an effective leader?
Yeah, I think it's what you're now mentioning is that we still don't realize. I have friends of mine who are also in the training environment who keep saying to me, stop telling people there's a difference between leadership and management. But there is a clear difference between leadership and management. So what's happened to your executive that you're discussing, this person, is they were promoted into a management position. And that's where they make the mistake. It's if you know anything about HR and business psychology and stuff, what they call the Peter principle. So it's I'm good at sales, now I get promoted to sales manager, or I'm good at engineering, now I get promoted to the engineering manager or leader. And it's not the same thing, because the technical skill, you can do that, that's what you were taught. We go to university, we study everything, and we get taught to be managers. Managers enforce and instruct. So you've got to make the targets, you've got to make things work, you've got to get the results. Whereas leaders empower and inspire. So, and we don't get taught that. So the skills that leaders need, as again, I've said it now a number of times, firstly is communication. There needs to be a clear vision. So if top management or senior leadership is appointing somebody into a leadership position, you can't just give them and sink or swim. You've now been promoted, you're good at this, go for it. They've got to equip them. They've got to tell them what is it that they want to achieve. They've got to give them the tools to allow them to do that. You've got to communicate it and properly across the whole organization so that everybody understands what's happening. But there's a change in the skills. So from technical skills to knowing how to be an engineer and brilliant and getting the results and the quality and all of that type of thing, it now changes, because what leaders don't often realize is that as the engineer, I was responsible for my own success. The way I did my job, the quality, if you use a salesperson as a very good example. So I'm making my sales targets, I'm getting my sales, that's what determines my success. The leader is not involved in the direct selling, they're not directly involved in the manufacturing or the quality. So their success is dependent on the success of the people they are leading. And if they can make that mind switch, then they will realize that it's not about them achieving, but it's about getting the team to perform better. And then their focus will change. So, a lack of accountability. Suddenly I can't jump in and do the work myself. I have got to build a relationship with somebody else and convince them to put the effort in, because in the process of them looking good, they make me look good. And I think that's the difference between leaders and managers. Leaders, it's not about you. You suddenly become an invisible cog in this machine, but it's a vital cog because you need to be there. So I don't know if you know the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu from 550 BC that said, if a team is successful and they don't even remember that the leader was part of it, that makes a good leader. So there's all these, we can carry on forever in that, but for me the thing is the leader needs to realize that it's not about them. So they suddenly need to go from technical skills, they need to learn people skills. So it's accountability. And there is like I said, I like concepts. So I have this thing called the leadership tree. And the word leadership then results in 10 fruits of the tree. But you only get to see the fruit once the roots have been established, and the roots are under the ground. And the roots is what Andy Bryant calls self-leadership. So that's self-awareness. It's about knowing where that you lack certain skills and then developing those skills. So as I mentioned, it's communication. It's not about you. There's getting mentors. I have a number of mentors that help me, and I get a lot of information from them. We sometimes feed off one another. It's building these networks of like-minded people that have the experience and somebody that can guide you. And unfortunately, most of the time it's not going to come from your leadership. It's going to be an initiative from your side. So if you get promoted into a leadership position and you feel like you're struggling and you can't tread water, then reach out, find somebody, find a mentor, find somebody that is in it that you can speak to. So develop some of those skills that you require creative skills, communication skills, networking skills. And in that way, you can start applying those. But unfortunately, it's not a quick fix. It's a journey. You know, it takes years to develop. You took years to train and to develop to become a good engineer in the case that example you mentioned. So you're not just going to step into a leadership position and get it right. But you've got to know that you're not in it on your own. You are not going to be able to drive everything yourself. You're going to need that team.
When I was with Emirates Airline, they had the Emirates Airline Aviation College. And when you went through the selection period to become a leader, you were then given an offer of acceptance, and then you had to attend training college for a period of 6 months. And Emirates Airline knew that if they were going to put a senior flight steward in charge of 14 to 15 crew, they had to have the right tools, they had to have the right skills, they had to have the right mindset. And Emirates Airline invested heavily into training their leaders. And what I would say is some of the best leaders that I've seen were in Emirates Airline, because they were given a system and they were given real world experience with time to develop. They had communication from their management and they had those regular feedback loops. This is what you're doing right, and this is how you can improve and do things differently next time. And it's quite an intensive training. After that, if you wanted to become a purser and be an onboard manager, there was another 6 to 12 month training period that you'd go through. And systematically, you'd be recruited, you'd be developed, and then once you proved to be competent and you had all your feedback, then they'd sign you off. But it was a development period. They didn't expect anybody could go from cabin crew to leadership overnight. And that's what made the airline so good. And I went through that leadership experience to eventually being able to co-lead a team of 17,500 cabin crew. They could give me 17 crew from 134 different nationalities, and I had the ability to get trust at the start. Build the trust, get the trust, know your people, and then brief them, and then direct them. You don't have to be out there, let them do it, but this is the sequence. And I really enjoyed that experience. But I know that along the way there was many mistakes. I led Australians and I thought to myself, they're just like me. Nothing like me. I flew with some Chinese crew and I thought they'd been to the same college, totally different interpretation. But through the leadership, we were able to get people to follow the service sequence and produce a predictable result. And it was quite exciting to be a part of that.
It's exactly. It's basically you've now encapsulated everything that is required. You can't take somebody and say, oh, because you're good at your job, I stick you in a leadership position and leave you. You get identified, you apply, and usually in the application there would be specific questions that they would ask to try and see what is your motivation for wanting to be a leader. Is it the right motivation? Are you merely looking for a position, or is it a calling? Do you feel that you can make a difference? So all of those things play a role, because if you are looking at it merely at a position, you're not going to be teachable. So you're going to be setting the person up for failure. I pull you in and I do it. The other thing is also it's the commitment, the investment from the company, the organization, to say that I am prepared to invest time and money in you to develop you because I see the potential. I know you can be a leader. Let me give you the right tools. But we don't want to invest anymore. I'm just sitting thinking, I did a couple of years back, I did a TEDx talk on adding salt to leadership. And it was exactly this. I used the proverb they used to say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I said you can lead a horse to water and you can make it drink. You just need to feed it enough salt. And then the SALT was an acronym for how you empower your people. So the S is show and tell, and that's normally what happens is sometimes if you're lucky, the A for application, I give you a chance to apply it, and then if you fail the first time, out you go next. And then I keep churning people through. I think I'm doing my job because I've got a leader in, but I'm actually killing the whole process. The L and the T is what usually never happens. So the L is learning by experience. That's, like you say, allowing you to make mistakes. Then, having that empathy and then saying, okay, you made a mistake. Let's talk through this. Let's see, how can you do it better next time? Where can I assist you to get it done better next time? So that you can learn, because we learn by experience. So you also need to have that chance to learn by experience. And we don't want to invest that time and effort for the experience part. And then the T, obviously, to round it off is, I think it was Benjamin Franklin that said, if you want to see if somebody knows something, get them to tell it to somebody else. So that's teaching it forward. That you eventually develop this person into a leader that can develop other leaders. So that's the idea behind it. And it's basically what you've said now is sort of the gist of it. It's, you can't just climb into a leadership position. It's not a position. You've got to want it, and you've got to want to lead. You've got to learn the skills. So, the innovative skills, the creativity, the leading yourself, being able to. The problem as well as with leaders is that once you move out of a team position into a leadership position, suddenly you have to learn how to motivate yourself. You don't have people saying this, that, and if you make this target, then I'll give you that. Suddenly, it's you need to motivate yourself, because it's the team that is now having to make the target so that you can be successful. And I mean, as an Australian or All Black or South African, you would realize it's probably the 3 countries in the world that the minute the team loses a game, suddenly they want to fire the coach. The coach was never on the field, but so that is the significance of leadership, is that if things go wrong, the leader gets blamed. So then you have to give them the right tools to be successful.
I think wanting to lead is so essential, and I saw that at Emirates Airline. Was some people just wanted to get a promotion so they could enjoy the benefits. Okay, I get a living hour allowance. I don't have to live with somebody anymore. I'm going to get a higher hourly rate. But they didn't want to lead. So they accepted the offer, but they were never effective. They stood at the back of the aircraft. They would put their hands in the tabard and things would go wrong non-stop. And it wasn't a pleasant working environment. And it didn't inspire other people to become leaders. When I had my opportunity, I felt that I had 99% of the time very good leaders, and I wanted to lead. And I remember it was about 7 years after I left the role, I was flying business class out of London Gatwick to Dubai, and I boarded the aircraft, and one of the crew said, "Daniel, welcome aboard." And I thought to myself, how do you know my name? And so I asked him, I said, "How do you know my name?" He said, "You're my very first leader here at Emirates Airline." He said, "My very first flight, you're the senior flight steward." And he said, "I want to do what that guy does." And he said, "And here I am, 7 years later, doing exactly what you were doing." And for me, it was like, wow, you know what? Maybe if it was just impacting one person's life, it was worth it. But I wanted to do it, and I was just trying to do my best to live up to the standard that had been set by the leaders before me. And now this guy is doing it, and I can only assume that he's impacted the following generation. But he had that desire.
It's, to get back to the concept of the leadership tree. So people judge the health of the tree, people judge how good the tree is by the fruit. And so as a leader, you're the tree. You need to, as I said, the roots is the self-leadership, is leading the skills. The trunk is your values that you have. You have to have those clear values, non-negotiable values, and that then results in the fruit and whether the fruit is good or not. And sometimes the fruit looks good from the outside until you open it up and you try and eat it. Then it's rotten, or the pips are not good enough. And it's the seeds in the fruit that then fall in the ground and create the next tree, which is exactly what you did. So in other words, the fruit that you bore as a leader was good fruit. And the seeds that were planted, even though you didn't see them grow, you eventually saw the fruit of that tree and realized that it came from your fruit. And that's what I say. So it's wanting to lead is that thing about making sure that I then learn the skills. If they don't teach me the skills, I go and learn the skills. As I said, at my age, I don't know, maybe I'm just a habitual student or whatever, but I think it's also partly because my mother and her sister both got Alzheimer's, so I am scared to death that my brain's going to rot, so I just keep studying and learning and new things all the time.
So
but I have a reasonably
have.
inquisitive nature as well. So that is why I would, if somebody put me in a position and they didn't equip me properly, I would make an effort to go and learn that. But it's like you say, it's because you wanted to lead. If you wanted a position, you would just say, you know what, you gave me this position, I'm no effort from my side, you better train me or whatever. And then your fruit is not going to be the good fruit that you're supposed to have. And I think that's the thing. So, and for me, and I'm sure for you it would have been as well, that is probably, it's not just a humbling experience, but it gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling when you see that you impacted somebody's life in a positive way, and they come to you and they say, it's because of you that I am where I am today. Then you know you've been a good leader. And you've built that, if there wasn't a relationship, they didn't trust you in the beginning, they wouldn't say that I wanted to be like you. So I think that's the thing. It's, we use words like role models and all of these things, but it boils down to the fact that, what impression am I creating? Am I inspiring somebody else to also want to achieve what I've achieved? And that way you get team engagement.
You said something interesting there about when you become a leader, you've got to become self-motivated. One of my first jobs, my leader in real estate, he was always motivating me. He was always guiding me. He was always providing feedback, taking me to trainings. And I asked him one day, I said, well, who's taking care of you? And he looked at me, and I think he thought the answer should have been that he had a leader, somebody to take care of him. But he said, Daniel, the truth is I've got to take care of myself. And for a while, I felt there was a bit of a gap there. Well, he's taking care of me. Who's taking care of him? Nobody. But as you become a leader, you start to realize that's the reality. You've got shit going on at home. You've got bills to pay, but you can't bring that stuff and dump it on the team. You've got to be able to manage that effectively. You've got to make good decisions for yourself whilst directing your team and keeping them focused. And I think that's so important for team members to realise that you've got to respect the leader, that they're at the top and they've got key accountabilities hit, but nobody's guiding them. They've got to do it themselves and they're taking care of you. I think that's a big one.
That is why you, as a leader, I believe, and that's the reason I belong to a number of mastermind groups, is because that is where leaders get the opportunity. Sorry, I've now just had the cup of coffee put in front of me. I haven't drank it yet. Let me have a sip.
Oh, I wish I had that service here.
It's because it's getting cold, sir, and I'm going to get into trouble. I belong to a number of mastermind groups. I have different mentors. I have a mentor for my book writing. I have, obviously, because as a Christian, I have a spiritual mentor. I have business mentors. So I have a lot of people that I believe are a lot more qualified than I am, that I look up to and that I respect, and that give me advice. So the thing is, a friend of mine once wrote a LinkedIn blog saying that leadership is a lonely game. And that's what happens, is if you especially get to the top part, who do you go to? Who do you speak to? Then you've got to find like-minded individuals. So as I say, I believe masterminds is probably one of the best ways of doing that. I'm in an entrepreneurial mastermind group called the Circle of Excellence, which is spread across 83 countries across the world. So we have people from all over. But the thing is that you need to look at it. So what I'm now busy with another book currently. We all write books, and this is what leaders should do, and this is what you should do, and this is what you should do. And I decided to turn it the other way around. It's like you asked, what is the reason for team engagement? Why do leaders fail? And I've decided to identify the top 10 reasons leaders fail. So it's called Top 10 Reasons Leaders Fail, Navigating Your Leadership Minefield. And it's things like lack of communication, lack of vision, lack of character, lack of self-awareness, and one of the big things is lack of self-care, which is what we're busy talking about now. So it's educating yourself, learning new skills, but it's also looking after yourself. Yeah, we put in all the hours, we work 16, 17, 18 hours a day, and then we don't sleep at night because we're lying thinking of what I need to do tomorrow. There's burnout, there's all kinds of things. Leaders look after everybody else's well-being, but they don't look after their own well-being. And I think it's important to have something that you can take a break, that you can relax. I've just over the years developed the thing, I made a commitment to my wife, 8 o'clock Monday till 5 o'clock on Friday, I will work 24 hours a day. But from 5 o'clock on Friday till 8 o'clock on Monday morning, it's time with my wife. Okay, my kids are out of the house, so I've got grandkids and the rest of it. So it's the two of us. And we have not date nights, we have a date afternoon. So currently, having sold my business in Namibia, the company I now work for, we officially close at 1 o'clock on a Friday. So Friday afternoons, my wife and I go find a new coffee shop or somewhere and just, sometimes we don't even talk to one another. We just sit there drinking coffee, watching the people, but it's just that connection and being there and knowing this person understands you and understand what you're going through. So I believe that leaders need to do that. They need to find some sort of an off switch or even a pause button if you don't have an off switch, that you can just recharge a little bit, and that you can, but as I say, it could be on a personal level, it could be on a spiritual level, it could be on a business level, but you need to connect with somebody. Our DNA was designed that we need to connect with people. So
my first boss, he said to me, Daniel, he said, you got to take time out for yourself. And he said, what I want you to do is I want you to put a couple of dummy appointments in your diary. Just put a name of a property in there and say you're out there doing an appraisal. He said, because you got to take care of yourself. And I remember one day I wrote the name of the property in my diary. I left my diary on the desk and I went to the driving range. And I set up tea and I looked down and there was my boss doing the exact same thing. He'd also put a dummy appointment in and was out there on the driving range. And what I learned was that he was always performing at a high level as a leader and somebody getting results because he was well rested. He took care of himself and he allowed for his team players to do that as well, because he knew you just can't burn the midnight oil all the time. You can do it for a certain period, but then you got to take the foot off the gas and relax and get back in there. And so I believe leadership has been changing, and you now talk about relational leadership. With this new model of leadership, how's relational leadership making an impact?
It's getting back to exactly everything we've been discussing. It's building relationships. So if I take my own marriage, where we now, I think next week sometime, on the 18th of November, I'll have been married for 35 years. I was married before that for 3.5 years. And the result was that we didn't have like interests, we didn't communicate with one another, and we ended up sort of doing our own thing, and we got caught up in our jobs and all kinds of other stuff that we just drifted apart. Luckily there were no kids, so it's not like, when there's children in a previous marriage, you get tired, and then it causes an other dynamic that is also difficult to handle sometimes. So I really take my hat off to people like that. But I've now been married for 35 years to my current wife, and we've gone through some bad spots. If I take about 10, 15 years ago, there was a point where we nearly got divorced again. And when I sat and I looked back on it and I thought, what was the problem? Then I realized it was two things. lack of communication, lack of trust. And the lack of trust was a result of the lack of communication. So you need to be open in your communication. You need to not hide things. And it's the same if you want to, as a leader, build relationships with your team. You need to be open with them. You don't have to give them all the nitty-gritty about all the financial details, but the information they need to know for them to sustain the relationship, you need to share that with them. You can't just tell them to do things and not get their buy-in and their commitment in it. So that's the crucial part. And that then builds trust. And once you start developing this trust, then you have a solid relationship. I mean, if you take your wife and your relationship, or you take friends or groups that belong to, or you talk about the driving range, so you probably play golf. I mean, you don't play soccer or rugby or this type of thing. There's no ways that the team is going to win without that relationship and that trust there. I know South Africa now won the Rugby World Cup recently, and yesterday they started with a ticker tape tour through South Africa, all the major cities and that. And Siya Kolisi, the captain, actually mentioned all these things, because we know what's happening with the South African government. They were actually at Union Building, and he was addressing the politicians and the president and the rest of it, and telling them that this is what they need to do. And what he was basically saying in a nutshell is, he believes the reason that the Springboks won the Rugby World Cup, apart from all the things that happened and all the sledding and all the complaining about the refs and the rest of it, was that they became a unit, they trusted one another, and they embraced the diversity in the team. So here we're talking primarily racial diversity, but if you look at a team, each team member brings a specific skill to the team, and you've got to embrace that, and you've got to allow the team to develop and to perfect that skill and to apply that, so that the team as a whole can develop. Simon Sinek often says that a team is not a group of people that are striving towards a common objective. A team is a group of people who trust one another completely. And that only happens if you build the relationships. So again, you were talking earlier about saying I love you to your wife and I love you to your friend. The minute you talk about relationships, then everybody thinks about sleeping with the secretary and the rest of it. I'm not talking about those type of relationships. I'm talking about building that relationship that I will put my life in your hands, figuratively speaking, in the business, to say I will trust you. I know you've got my back. I know you're not going to throw me under the bus if things go wrong. That as a team, we're a unit, and we know that we need to operate with one another. The same thing if one of the team is on leave, or they're off sick, or they're not there, that the team automatically just absorbs that person's role and fills it. That's what relationships do. Otherwise it becomes a thing, it's not in my job description, I'm not doing it. Whether the wheels fall off or not, it's not my job description. And I think that's where the relational comes. And what's happening is that the more leaders accept and understand that they need to build these relationships, that they need to develop these commodities of trust, the more successful they are starting to become. It's difficult because if you've been doing things one way for the last 10, 15 years, you're not going to change overnight. That habit is hard to break. But the results are there. You can see things happening. I work with people, companies that I've seen that suddenly, in the beginning, there's a lot of skepticism. Excuse me, why are you now suddenly acting differently? Because the leader's now making an effort to start building these relationships, and a little bit suspicious about what's going on. Are you trying to catch us out? And then when they realize that the leader's genuine, that he actually wants to make a change, actually wants to start developing this relation, then they start opening up, and then they start sharing, and then they start becoming a lot more honest with what they do and their dealings with one another. And then you suddenly see the team flourish. And then without a lot of effort, the team suddenly starts improving.